Good afternoon to our American guests. Good evening to our Italian guests. Climate change affects all components of the Earth system through changes to the environment, ecosystems, and human societies. Adaptation requires understanding the combined impact of climate change and human practices. Cracking the challenge of food is key to succeeding in mitigating climate change and achieving sustainable growth. Indeed, the production and distribution of food generates unsustainable pressures on the planet. For instance, a quarter of man-made greenhouse gas emissions are caused by deforestation and agriculture. And nearly 3/4 of deforestation occurs to make room for growing crops. Additionally, climate change affects our ability to grow crops. These difficulties are even more daunting as we project the global population to reach 10 billion by 2050. This growth will generate inequalities in access to food. These global challenges, climate, biodiversity loss, food, water, equity, are linked and can only be addressed together. Food production is intimately connected with water. About 70% of the globe is covered by water. Aquatic or blue foods already provide nutrients for 3 billion people with relatively low environmental footprint. Blue food demand could double by 2050, and given the limited potential for growth in fisheries production, most of this demand will have to be met by aquaculture. On land, food production obviously depends on water. As a rule of thumb, 1 kilogram of bread requires 1 cubic meter of water. For meat, this is about 15 times more. These numbers are all the more concerning as rising incomes often go hand in hand with an increase in demand for animal protein. Furthermore, as rain-fed agriculture is not sufficient to feed us in most parts of the world, irrigation creates competition for water between agriculture and natural systems, thus posing a challenge for sustainability. Within this context, efficiency takes on a different meaning than the traditional one, as it must include notion of circular economy and regeneration in order not to waste precious resources. Today's discussion starts with the first two speakers examining how ocean and land contribute to the food solution. The third speaker reflects on the new transformational approaches that are required for regeneration of our planet and our well-being. So let us start with Professor Fiorenza Micheli, co-director of Stanford's Center for Ocean Solutions and Hopkins Marine Station. Professor Micheli is a marine ecologist interested in understanding human impacts on the marine environment and designing conservation and restoration strategies. So the opening question to Professor Fiorenza Micheli is, what is the health of the ocean and how is blue aquatic food part of the solution? Please go ahead, Professor Micheli.
Thank you for the introduction and the opportunity to participate in this roundtable. I want to start by congratulating the recipient of the many prestigious awards. And I have to say it's a true honor to be a part of this celebration and part of this community as well. The health of the oceans globally is threatened by climate change, over-extraction of resources, and pollution. I'm actually joining this event from Diego Garcia, which is in the Indian Ocean, in the middle of a very large marine protected area. We spent 1 month conducting research in these coral reefs. And despite being in one of the most pristine areas of the world, it's obvious that the reefs are impacted by illegal fishing, plastics, and the recent heat waves that cause coral bleaching in this area. So really no corner of the world is immune from human impacts. And these impacts erodes the services, the many benefits the oceans provides to humanity. One of these benefits, the next slide, please. So one of these benefits is food provision. There are thousands of species of animals and algae and plants that are captured or produced in the oceans. And this diversity of products, of resources is already really important. As it was just mentioned, aquatic or blue foods provide 20% or more of animal protein for over 3 billion people worldwide. The blue food sector provides livelihood for 10% of the human population. Next. So where is this the supply of blue food coming from, and how has it changed over time? This is a time series of production of seafood, actually of aquatic foods from marine and freshwater systems, and we can see that this the production has changed dramatically. So production from wild capture fisheries, the orange and the red, the orange is marine and red is inland, has basically stagnated starting in the 90s at around 80 million metric tons. And then starting then, production has really escalated exponentially coming from aquaculture, which is the blue. However, production from aquaculture comes with a series of environmental impacts, and also it's very unevenly distributed, both geographically and in terms of the ecosystems. Next slide, please. In fact, most of the production is coming from China and other Asian countries, as you can see, the majority, and most of it comes from inland water, which is the dark blue. So there are daunting challenges in sustaining the demand. And next slide, please. These problems, the production of aquatic foods and in food in general is one of the grand challenges that we're facing going forward. The food system is already underfeeding or overfeeding half of the world, basically. So half of the world is malnourished, either as overfeeding or underfeeding. Notably, as many as 2 billion people suffer from some form of macronutrient deficiency, and as many as 160 million children below the age of 5-year-old are undernourished. And then going forward, the next slide, please, the food system will really strain to feed as many as 10 billion people by year 2050. Also, changes in affluence and income in different parts of the world are driving a rising demand of animal protein. And part of this will need to come from the oceans. There's increasing inequalities in access to food, and then also the impact of climate change from heat waves, floods, fires, droughts that are affecting the food system. So there's a need for a major transformation of the global food system. However, most of the action, most of the discussion concentrate on agricultural crops, especially few ones like rice and grains, as well as livestock. And blue foods are left largely out of debates, action, investments, and solutions. So next slide. So I'm going to just say a few words about a concerted analysis that we have led, the Center for Ocean Solutions, together with other collaborators, which was the first attempt to take a global look of what can the role of blue foods be in moving towards a healthier, more sustainable, more resilient global food system. So this analysis brought together, this initiative brought together over 100 scientists and practitioners internationally. It was led by Center for Ocean Solutions, Center for Food Security and Environment at Stanford, as well as Stockholm Resilience Center and other partners. And the analysis that we conducted over the past 2 years focused on questions such as what is the role of blue foods in human nutrition? What is the environmental footprint of blue food production, and what are the environmental limits? What are trends in demands, and so on and so forth. And the results are published in 9 different papers published in Nature journals. Then importantly, these insights were brought into the agenda of the United Nations Food Summit that was held in September this year, which for the first time included blue foods in each of its action tracks. So next, I'm just going to highlight a few of the results that this analysis produced. So one of the papers focused on the role of blue foods in nutrition, and this team put together the largest database of the nutritional profiles and nutritional content of over 3,500 species of blue foods. So the results show that many aquatic foods, many blue foods, are actually richer in nutrients than terrestrial meats. And this is particularly the case for calcium, omega-3 fatty acids, and vitamin B12. For example, a single serving of some species of small pelagic fishes, fishes that live in the open ocean, is sufficient to meet the daily requirements of these important nutrients for people. So the modeling projection in these papers actually indicated that expanding the production and access, the equitable distribution of aquatic foods could end malnutrition for over 100 million people. So this could be a strategy that actually contributes to addressing malnutrition in hotspots of malnutrition. So for example, some of the strategies could include including blue foods in national dietary guidelines and nutrition programs. For example, in countries that range from Vietnam to India to Cambodia, powdered seafood has been included as additive in children's feeding programs through schools, and also as an additive, as a supplement for pregnant and lactating women. So these are some of the innovations that could allow to including blue foods as one of the solutions to malnutrition. And then, of course, strengthening the supply chains, promoting more sustainable aquaculture practice, and then enabling access where these superfoods, these nutrition foods are most needed through more equitable trade networks. Sorry, next slide, and the next one. Sorry, I've already commented on this. Sorry, this is the following one. Yeah, the next. So while aquaculture and fisheries do come with environmental impacts, sorry, the previous one, previous slide, please. Yes, while so there are environmental impacts, of course, but the huge diversity of species that are produced in the ocean and modes of production actually also brings opportunity. And in fact, in this additional paper, we evaluated the environmental performance, the footprint of different types of aquatic foods, and found that many blue foods already perform well when compared to other foods, for example, in the terrestrial environment, in terms of global warming, eutrophication, land use, or water consumption. For example, shellfish, farm bivalves, and also wild-caught small pelagics produce the least greenhouse gases, and even some forms of fed aquaculture like carps and tilapia and catfish are comparable in terms of their environmental footprint to the production of chicken, for example, which is the most efficient meat that we produce. So there's really, this analysis also showed through an analysis of alternative scenarios that there's also potential for future gains, both in improving existing blue food production system. For example, there's a huge potential for improvements in aquaculture feed, both in decreasing the quantity of feed needed and also its sourcing. And also improvement in the overall system of production by shifting to species that have a lower environmental footprint, for example, farm seaweed and shellfish, and also shifting away from fishing gears like a bottom trolling or long lines that come with huge fuel use and therefore greenhouse gas emissions. Next one, please. So production of blue foods, next slide, is threatened by climate hazards, which include, of course, warming, ocean acidification, and sea level rise, and sort of the threats that we're seeing with global warming. And in this analysis, we combined data available on exposure, or where risk of exposure to these climate hazards is highest, with the dependence of different nations on blue foods and their capacity to adapt. And we projected under different climate change scenario, under different emission scenarios, what the risks might be for the middle of the century and then the end of the centuries. And so this analysis and modeling projection highlighted some real hotspots of risk in terms of the capacity of these nations to sustain aquatic food productions and so to the needs, the demand for aquatic foods going forward. And these hotspots are found, as you can see here in the map, the darkest colors in Africa, in South, East and South Asia, and in island nation. So next slide, please. The real opportunity for blue foods and global food system in general is in the small scale sectors. Small scale producers that range from subsistence fishing and farming all the way to fairly sophisticated commercial operation span production, processing, and trade, and in many different roles. And actually, this diversity is a real asset because it brings a capacity to adapt. And we have seen this globally with the COVID-19 pandemic, when in many parts of the world, small scale production really was the motor that sustained and that provided for food and nutrition and livelihoods in the face of the pandemic. Next slide. So to harness this opportunity, some of the actions that are most urgent are to protect small-scale producers from the squeeze that other blue sectors are subjecting them to. So to basically to maintain their operating space, so through land and water and labor rights, for example, securing nutritional benefits. For example, in many parts of the world, these nutritious, really important blue foods are exported and often converted in feed for aquaculture and for livestock. And so retaining some of these nutritional benefits in countries is really important. For example, Peru has instituted policy where some of their pelagics that are caught and largely exported to China to produce feed are retained in countries. There's a fraction and now it's to be retained. And then investment in innovation and supporting the versatility, the flexibility, and the innovation potential of food. So there's in closing, there's great potential in blue food, not to be the silver bullet, but to be an important part of the puzzle in addressing the grand challenge of food security, climate, and biodiversity loss. And to capitalize on this potential, there are at least three priorities. One is to include blue foods in policies that address the the food system overall. So spanning production to consumption and aquatic to terrestrial systems. For example, developing a circular economy where the discards and byproducts from one part of the food system, for example, aquatic ones, can feed into other parts of the system, for example, livestock and agriculture. Retaining, seeing foods, blue foods, not just as a natural resource that is maximized for its economic benefit, but also really supporting its benefit in terms of public health and nutrition. And finally, supporting the central role of small-scale actors as a source of resilience and innovation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fiorenza. Now let me introduce our second panelist, who is Professor Amilcare Porporato of Princeton. Professor Porporato is a hydrologist whose research focuses on the description and prediction of the complex dynamics of the terrestrial hydrology, with special interest in the impact of its changes on variability of ecosystem processes and the related energy, carbon, and nutrient cycles. So the opening question to Amilcare is, in order to continue to produce food from the land, what is necessary for the next generation to adapt and thrive in a changing climate?
Thank you, Federico. Hello, hello everyone, and thank you, Cinzia and ISSNAF, for organizing all of this. It's really exciting. Let me share my screen here. I have a few slides that I would like to use to answer your question, Federico. Okay, can you see?
Yes.
Perfect. So this, it's of course a very deep question, and I'm only going to give some nuggets that try to answer this question. The question is actually a threefold question. It's not just food, but the great challenge, as you said, and as Fiorenza also mentioned, is that with one problem we get other two problems. One is climate, and the other one is biodiversity. And there is competition between these three problems, because there is a competition for resources, and there's competition for space, of course. When the connection between the excuse me, between the food system and the climate and the biodiversity system comes from the fact that, as I said, they share resources. 60% of the water that comes on land goes back to the atmosphere, going through the plants, through the system plants, and that's a huge amount of water worldwide. As you mentioned, this is the reason why for 1 kilogram of bread that we eat, the requirement to grow that wheat is a cubic meter of water, and much more if we now think of meat and so on. So in general, there is this strong connection, but also when we do agriculture, unless we are in a semi-arid system, but in most of the places where there is enough rainfall, doing agriculture means reducing the amount of carbon in the ecosystem, less carbon in the biomass, less carbon in the soil. And that's of course a problem, because that means more carbon in the atmosphere, with then a feedback on climate that we well know. In terms of competition for space, here is just a graph that speaks by itself. On the left, we have cropland area from the year 1000 all the way to the year 2000 and past that. But you see the super exponential growth here. Now we are at 20 million square kilometers of air impacted by agriculture. This is basically the US and Europe and more combined together. And we're not talking about any land, we're talking about the best land available, the best soils, the most fertile soils. And on the right, this is a sense of how we're stepping on the gas of the biogeochemical cycling, of the cycles of carbon, of the cycle of nutrients, nitrogen in premise, and so on. And you can see that on all accounts, from irrigation to cereal yield, nitrogen fertilizer production, phosphate production, meat production, and we could add to this graph other quantities, they're all increasing very, very fast. So we're really stepping on the gas of this system. And what is crucial for the future, as you asked me, is that first of all, we know what the boundaries of the system are. We don't want to step into a domain that is fragile, that is critical, and do something like this example that I'm providing here. This is South Carolina, the Calhoun area, that I've studied extensively with colleagues with funds from the National Science Foundation. There was intense cultivation. Here is cotton, but it's not food, but the story is the same for many other crops. And when we just do intense and wrong cultivation, then what happens is just shown on the right. And you can map it on larger scales. You can see it from satellite. The image below shows a quantitative analysis of the geomorphology, how it has been changed by both agriculture and then the subsequent land degradation. You can actually see it in the distribution of the landscape that is no longer the same and doesn't function the same way in terms of water cycle, carbon cycling, and all the rest. So we want to avoid that. We want to avoid the land degradation. We want to avoid also other types of land degradation in terms of soil salinization or contaminations of even worse type. This is just an example with the soil salinization. Soil salinization is certainly not a new problem. It caused the fall of many civilizations from the Assyrian and in Babylonia and so on. But it's threatening now at a much larger scale. Australia, California, Northeast Brazil, places in Africa and in Eastern Asia are all prone to this type of problems. And this is what happens when you irrigate for a long time with water that is not perfectly suitable, with that has a little bit of salt that then stays and concentrate into the soil. And the problem with these degradations is that they have an element of irreversibility. It takes lots of energy and lots of effort and lots of money to reverse, to restore these soils, and sometimes it's even just impossible. So coming to solutions, not just problems, what can we do? And here let me just give you a few examples. One is here in the picture. For example, technology and recent research has actually provided us with the weeding robots, which is very interesting. It's using artificial intelligence, pattern recognition, recognizing weeds versus crops, and doing what instead we are used to do chemically by pumping pesticides and herbicides. So that's one way, one potential solution that could really be promising. More generally, you were also mentioning that it's a matter of optimizing, of improving agriculture with not just the usual optimization of efficiency, producing more food, having a more efficient productivity, but a multi-objective optimization, something that keeps in mind also carbon content of the agroecosystem, that keeps in mind the impact, the water footprint, and lots of biodiversity, as I mentioned, and so on. So basically now when we do agriculture, it becomes a problem of being precise, doing precision agriculture, using the right crops in the right soils, which means monitoring soils, the quality of soil, and cultivating really only where it's profitable and useful, and leaving the other spaces to biodiversity and other uses, carbon sequestration, and so on. And we shouldn't just think that this is only a scientific and a technological problem. I think Sara, in the next talk, will talk more in depth about that. But here is just an example of the interface of this problem with social and economical dimensions that we have. This is an example of land degradation coming from extensive quinoa cultivation in Bolivia. This has become a fancy, healthy food, quinoa, in the United States and everywhere in the world, and rightly so. But when some demand is exaggerated, then there are teleconnections that can produce extra problems somewhere else. And so we need to keep that in mind. It's a global problem that doesn't just affect us locally. And finally, just as an example taken from my research, is Another solution could be just looking for crops that have less footprint. This is an example of CAM plants. CAM is crassulacean acid metabolism, is the plants of pineapple, cacti, prickly pear, and so on, agave, that use incredibly less amount of water compared to the other typical plants that have a C3 photosynthesis, or C4, like corn and wheat. And so I want to conclude with this example of this study where we have developed model to predict how these plants will do in the future. Here is former student of mine, Samantha, who developed the model and then tested the model in the field with this gas chamber. This is prickly pear, and then tried also to push the educational part of the problem, meaning not only we need to study these problems, but we have to convince people that these foods are good, not just for you, but also for the environment. And here is Samantha again at in campus organizing a dinner that she called it the photosynthesis dinner, where basically all plants were compared in terms of their water footprint, and she's eating here prickly pear, fico d'India, and then we had all sorts of foods. And the students, of course, it's easy to start at the university level, but this message really needs to trickle down globally if we want to make a difference. And I'll leave it like that for now. Thank you, Federico.
Thank you, Amilcare. And now to our third panelist, Sara Roversi. Sara Roversi is an entrepreneur and disruptor in the food ecosystem. Sara co-founded the Future Food Institute, an international social enterprise whose mission is to promote food innovation as a strategic element to achieve sustainable and impactful growth. So before I greet you, as the rest of the panel will be moderated by the president of ISSNAF, Cinzia Zuffada, this is my opening question to Sara Roversi. What is the integral ecological regeneration? How does your work connect with the scientific work going on in academia and in NGOs?
Thank you so much, Federico. Thank you so much for this question, because your question is going to give me the opportunity to start to connect the dots. So I'm going to share my screen. Here we are. So it's really a great pleasure to be here with you today. And I'm talking to you from the World Expo in Dubai. But actually, I think it's pretty connected with the topics we are debating about today. So, of course, you're telling me, how might we connect the dots between integral ecology and how might we transform science and knowledge into practical actions and impact? When we started, I'm a food entrepreneur. When we started, actually, my biggest frustration was to see industries 9 years ago keep going, developing fancy product, tasty products, but without understanding what's the power of food and what's the responsibility of people working in food. Food is everything. Food is connecting people, but food is also culture, identity. People working in the food system are the ones taking care of the landscape, taking care about resources, biodiversity, the quality of soil, of the air, but also they are the one investing on our health, responsible for our health. So it's such a fascinating thing to work in food. And I was feeling almost powerless because I was just focused on selling my product without giving any added value to the entire ecosystem. And overall, I'm coming from Emilia-Romagna, that is a region where actually we were working for centuries to protect our traditions without thinking that was necessary to innovate our traditions within the years and the history if we want to leave them a legacy for the future, but also that we need to find a balance between what is good for us and what is good for the planet. And so, of course, it was pretty fascinating to see what's the power of food, and on the other hand, which are the biggest paradoxes of our era. Because when we're talking about food, we heard pretty well from Fiorenza and as well from Amilcare. We're talking about a system, a very complex system where actually we see tons of inequalities. We have millions of people dying for hunger and million people, even more people dying for health disease caused by food because they are obese, and there are tons of other health issues related to that. But then there's the issue of climate change, the issue of water, the issue of resources, soil degradation, biodiversity loss, and at the end, the paradox of food waste. 1/3 of the food produced that goes into trash. So when you think about that and you think about the values, you see huge potential. But then this has been the question that for the last 9 years has been probably the big title of every conference. How might we are going to feed the 10 billion people? And when I see this question, I try to see where we're going to live by 2050, because by 2050, number says that the 70% of the planet are going to live in hyper-urbanized center. But the next question is how we're going to look like as a planet, because we're going to see part of the world that are going to grow younger and exploding younger, and probably part of the planet that not only are going to be very much going to aging, but also they're going to be old. Countries like Italy or Japan are going to be old in the next decades ahead. So while we're thinking about that, and we know that we have to produce in a more efficient way, I'm starting thinking, okay, how we can transform all the knowledge that scientists are giving us into tangible actions. So when we started, really, we were trying to mapping out all the startups, innovation, research that were actually giving a tangible contribution, trying to map out which were the, say, the big topics, caring about the environment, caring about production, transforming the concept of access to food, making food accessible for all and also safe, mapping out all the technologies and innovations happening around nourishment, the concept of nourishment and transforming really food as a medicine. And then trying to analyze how technology and the digital transformation was actually transforming our interaction with food in our homes, but also in the farms and also maybe in the restaurants, and why and how we're sourcing our information related to food. Because many, many times we as consumers, we are taking the wrongest choice, thinking that maybe is the most sustainable one, but without actually knowing which are the impacts of our choices. So I'm here at the World Expo, where actually the big topic is sustainability, connecting minds, making the future, and we are all talking about innovation. But there's actually another very important year. For sure, 2021 is going to be remembered in the future, but 2015 was marking probably the big mind shift for the entire planet. 2015 was the year in which the Sustainable Development Goals were announced. Pope Francis announced Laudato Si. For the first time, a religious document was talking about finding a balance between humans and the planet. And in Paris, COP21 was pushing all the entire planet to sign finally an agreement to keep the temperature, the world temperature, under 1.5 degrees. And so this year was the year in which the entire planet started to create this huge wave of awareness related to which are the impacts of our choices and which are the goals we have to achieve by 2030. Of course, this gave us a huge opportunity, because before we were feeling like aliens trying to advocate for that. But after the SDGs came to life, everything became much simpler for all of us. And what we did, we started working with the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, that actually has thousands of people researching about food everywhere in the world. And we started analyzing which are the main areas of innovation. And here comes integral ecology. When we're talking about integral ecology, we're talking about an approach to ecology that is forcing us to keep all together different approaches, 6 topics, thinking about the economical perspective, the political perspective, the human perspective and the social perspective, but all together with culture, that is anyway a pillar, a very important pillar where we talk about food, but also the environmental perspective. And here is the map that we co-designed with them, and there are 5 areas of action. And you see, the first one that I always want to mention is climate smart ecosystems. When we're talking about climate smart ecosystem, this is really the big starting point. The big starting point where actually we need to create agricultural practices, solutions for the management of the oceans, and Fiorenza can tell us so much about that, that are going to create the balance we need. And we started mapping out which are the models, the platforms, the metrics that are facilitating this transition. And regenerative approach is becoming the crucial platform where actually all the big companies are now going. If you think about the big announcement that Danone, Nestle, Unilever, the big giants of the food industry has been making in the last months, basically this is something that can really completely change and reshape the structure of the entire food system. When those kind of companies are saying and announcing to the shareholders that they are going to change their procurement system from our traditional procurement system towards basically a regenerative approach, this means that the entire food chain is going to be disrupted. Something is going to change in the governance. Something is going to change in the distribution. Something is going to change also in the kind of products that we are going to see in the shelves tomorrow. And everything starts from the reason why we need to create climate smart ecosystems. Then we started thinking about the topic of circularity. We are all focused on circular economy, but circular economy is not enough. Here, we are talking a lot about energy. And when we are talking about food, energy is strictly connected. All the resources are strictly connected. Water, energy, soil, biodiversity. Thinking in a circular way must become our way of thinking everywhere. What's going to be the life of my clothes? What's the life of my light? How I'm creating and finding energies that are lighting my entire home. And so implementing models that are pushing people to change mindset in a circular way is becoming something crucial. And this was a game-changing thing for the industry as well, because finally, with circular economy, industry started seeing investment in sustainability not as a cost, but as a new value. Tons of innovations are happening in the industry now, just upcycling food losses from farm to fork. And this is just a very simple example that actually is accelerating the process towards a very sustainable model. Going on, here comes culture. Food and food, considering all the values that food represent in our life. Food is connected to every ideology, every religion. Food is culture, food is family, food is love. And nobody thinks about what's the power of food within a society. And so we started seeing which are the actions that we can put in place, really highlighting what's the power of food identities. And then the last 2 elements, food diplomacy and prosperity. Here we see this big map, and this big map really can help you to understand which are the different, say, areas in which we can focus, really to reshape the world, starting from the power of food. So now our ecosystem is working very closely with institutions, local administrations, and industries. And in these 9 years, my co-founder is a professor of design thinking and innovation. So we have this, say, identity, a very strong identity connected to innovation process. And when the SDGs came to life, we started thinking, how might we embed within the process nature as a new stakeholder around the table? And working with the industry, we started understanding that this was a priority. And then you start to read news about BlackRock investing in green finance, and you start to see the SDGs priorities connected to the ESG investment priorities. And then you start understanding that investing in something that is more than a nice product that is good for our customer is needed. And so we started studying what's the evolution of design thinking. And here it comes really the connection between the knowledge and the science and products and innovation and startup and the solutions that are coming to life nowadays. When I was studying, my professor teaching marketing, they were pushing me to find solutions to sell what I want to sell to my customer. Then 20 years ago, with design thinking, everything changed, because we started learning that we need to co-design products together with our customer. But then when the SDGs came to life, we understood that was not enough, that we need to involve other stakeholders around the table. And these stakeholders is the planet, is the nature. And we have to change our mindset from an ecosystemic perspective when humans are leading into an ecosystemic perspective, when humans are one of the players within the ecosystem. And so we changed completely our perspective from a human-centered innovation towards a human plus nature-centered innovation, life-centered innovation. And this is actually what we see happening within the entire food chain. Prosperity thinking is the new approach that in every R&D department is happening pretty spontaneously. We're not anymore talking just about ecology, because ecology needs to embed also the human and the social aspects, the cultural aspects. We need to include all the elements of ecology. Being just sustainable from the environmental perspective is not enough, because sometimes you are taking the right decision from the environmental perspective, but then you are creating even worse damage if you're not considering to keep the balance along the entire, let's say, value chain and along the entire aspects that are basically connected to our life. And then what's going to be the governance in the future? We see what is happening in the crypto world. Crypto is disrupting finance, because actually there are new ways of perceiving the approach to finance. And this for sure is going to create an impact. From the cultural perspective, also the food industry, if the regenerative process is going to take place like it seems is going to be, for sure, we are going to see governance that are going to be more and more decentralized, empowering farmers, empowering the network, and shifting from the value of being the leader in an ecosystemic world, from the value of being an ecosystem leader, an ecosystem builder. The power of ecosystems now are crucial. Last but not least, regeneration is going to be the key. That is connected to our approach to this circular mindset and this circular living approach. So what we have been doing in these years, just to let you understand why we're talking like that, in these 9 years, we started creating an ecosystem and proving on our skin what we're talking about. Creating an ecosystem that is investing in education, creating communities, but also working closely with the industries. And so from the academic perspective, we are, of course, every day connected with scientists. We are connected with young innovators, with incubators, with people that are researching and giving us the numbers, the data, the trustful data, because we need to rely on science. But then we need also to be better and better to connect those information with the local communities. with people, with mothers, with people that are taking decisions every single day, with industry leaders, but also with normal people, because everybody can make an action towards its food decisions every single day, many times a day. And last but not least, supporting industry, supporting institutions, supporting people that want to make the change really in a tangible way. So supporting them, implementing prosperity thinking, say, in their daily process of innovation. And this is the end. So I strongly believe that each time we gather around the table, we really have to celebrate our history, our past, our culture, because we are made from our food. But also we are experiencing with the people eating with us, eating and cooking and sharing is something that is going to impact on our health. Last but not least, every single bite can make an impact and is connecting us to our future. So this is actually what we do, and we think it's crucial to do every single day to inspire people to reflect on our daily choices related to food.
Thank you, Sara. Thank you. I'm stepping in for Federico Rampini. During the course of this event, we learned that he had to step away. And so I'm jumping in, wearing my hat of the Associate Chief Scientist of JPL. So let's continue with this very interesting conversation. So we have heard about blue food, and we have heard about food from the land. And then we have heard, Sara talk about the necessity for regeneration. So let's step back, and I want to ask Fiorenza, what do you think is going to be, the basic problem for the success of blue food going forward in terms of making it available, accessible? People live on land. Blue food would move, in a larger scale. The stakeholders that would be, of course, involved in the production, distribution. There is the transportation, the energetic aspect. So how do you see this happen if we are going to increase the fraction of food that will come from the ocean as opposed to land?
Yes, thank you for the question, Cinzia. And the problems are many, and I would say overarching, looming over everything is the constraints, the risk that climate change is going to put on production. So particularly as it relates to production of aquatic food from inland areas, from lakes, from rivers, from freshwater aquaculture. Those are sectors that are extremely vulnerable to the projected impacts of climate change. In our analysis, the most vulnerable sectors were freshwater aquaculture and freshwater fisheries. So those are some of the challenges. As Sara mentioned, urbanization, the encroachment of urban areas in coastal and inland areas is also going to go. So environmental change and climate change are really straining the capacity of the natural systems to produce. So these are some of the major threats. The other one that is more human related relates to how we manage these resources and these threats for production, but also for distribution and access. And the oceans are, in a way, the last frontiers, are our ability to govern, to regulate what happens in the oceans is still fairly limited. And that, I would say, is the other major impediment I think that we're facing. So governance, solutions that are designed with stakeholders and addressing the impacts of climate change, both in terms of mitigation, of course, but just adaptations, shifting to climate resilient species, making coastal areas and inland areas stronger in the face of climate impacts through revegetation and other forms of natural protection. So really drawing on the portfolio of solutions that are available and new ones that we have yet to create to address these threats. So that's where really reaping the potential of Blue Foods lies now, in being able to address these big problems.
Thank you very much. A question for Amilcare. What should we expect in the Earth warming scenarios that we have seen, we have all read about in terms of the warming to 1.5 degrees or beyond by the end of the century? In terms of what's going to happen to the water cycle and the impact to the various latitudinal zones. So what should we be thinking about in terms of how the various zones might change with respect to the ability to utilize the land based on our current scientific understanding?
Thank you, Cinzia. Of course, it's a very difficult thing to predict. We rely on climate models, and climate models do a great job, but they're not certainly perfect. And one of the biggest difficulties that the climate models have is to predict actually changes in precipitation. We are pretty sure that it will be warmer, and that has pros and cons, and mostly cons, but some pros also for agriculture. There will be better wine, for example, from Canada. So some areas will expand their agriculture. But there will be problems related, for example, to having more pests somewhere, that some places will become warmer and we'll get more parasites, more problems cultivating their crops. In terms of the water cycle, it seems pretty sure that increasing the amount of energy into the water cycle will increase the intensity of some precipitation and probably also increase the interarrival times between rainfall events. So intense rainfall and then longer periods of potentially droughts. And that's, of course, a problem for agriculture. More erosion, and then need to irrigate, need to find water. And for places like Italy, or like in the US, California, which is very similar to Italy in my view, the snow that much of our agriculture relies on snow, the snow melt in the spring. For example, the rice cultivation in northern Italy. Now, with climate change, we certainly can expect earlier snow melt, and therefore changes in the way we organize our agriculture around those things.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Thank you. Let me move to another question, and this one for Sara. We have seen this, let's say, contention, right? Food production on land or food production in the ocean, and different set of stakeholders and a different set of, let's say, political forces at play, right? Regulations are very different. So what do you see as perhaps the main issues that organizations like yours might have to focus on in terms of perhaps giving the Blue Food more of a chance of becoming a more consistent part of the food equation going forward?
I strongly believe that education plays always a crucial role. And education means working together also with policymakers and institutions to make education entering in the life at every level of people. Education nowadays is not playing a role only in schools, but plays a crucial role in our daily life. So what you're talking about blue food is something that we can also apply to many other issues while we are educating people to eat better, understanding that our eating habits can have also an economic impact, because if you are eating well, we are also better citizens. We cost less to our countries. So eating healthy is good for us and is good also for the health of the planet. So this is, I think, a very, very crucial element, because this requires a double effort. And nowadays we need, all of us, become better communicators. We also, we are talking about us and our organization, what's the role we are playing. Our role is really sometimes to become the bridge between complex topics, complex issues, complex numbers, and transform them into actions, into proposals, into something that can be easy to understand for everyone. So I really think that this is the starting point. And I think that youth play a crucial role, but not alone. Now we have been seeing in this overall in the last 5 years, the growth of youth movements, Greta, the climate summit. We have been hearing their voices. And we support youth so much. As you know, we run boot camps everywhere in the world, and this is our core project. But we also see that sometimes they simplify too much the message. And sometimes it's not so easy to explain complex systems. So we all probably have seen Kiss the Ground or Seaspiracy. I wish I could spend some time with Fiorenza to talk about Seaspiracy, to hear from her voices some critical messages, because talking with scientists, they tell me, no, they have been simplified too much, some concept. This is not exactly like that. And so I think we play all a critical role, because then when you advocate, you need also to explain the complexity of our choices. And this is not simple at all. Food is not a simple system. And so I really invite your scientific community, because we need you and we need your support to understand better and to become better communicator. Because then if we inspire people to take action, we need really to make sure that we are pushing on the right direction.
Thank you, Sara. I think that's a very good note that in a sense summarizes one of the takeaway points of our conversation. We have come to the end of our event. We have been running a little bit late. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I hope you enjoyed the excitement of the early career investigators, our keynote lecture, and this very interesting roundtable discussion, which I hope is just an opening of more things to come next year in person, hopefully. And the appointment is for next year, I hope, at the embassy for our next annual event. Thank you all for participating and for making this possible.